And if you go to Daniel chapter 2, now the book of Daniel, as I said last week, is a very practical book. It's, in fact, in a sense, one of the most practical prophetic books that you can read, because there are some tremendous practical truth in the character of Daniel and in the character of his three friends, but at the same time also one of the most remarkable in that God demonstrates what his plan is, and many of the prophetic books, Jeremiah, Isaiah, much of that is focused on the millennial kingdom, of course preaching to his people who have turned to idolatry, to warn them that they're going to go into captivity, which they do. Daniel's a product of that. And then to tell them that, yes, but the captivity is going to end, and God's still going to get glory through his nation, and he's going to restore them to a land. And that's much of what the prophecy is focused on, of course, is that Jesus would come and set up a kingdom. So every Jew knew that. A Jew that understood the Bible had any sense of the plan for the Jew was that Jerusalem would be the center of the earth, and that the Messiah would come and sit on that throne. And of course, at the same time, there's prophecies that he would come the first time, of course, and would die on a cross. But the whole Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, including the prophetic book, all point to the Lord Jesus Christ. So we don't change when we get to Daniel. But if you could almost picture it in this sense, on the one hand, the Jews are looking at the picture of Jesus on this side with a little bit more understanding of him being the king. God now shows the Gentiles a picture from this side, same principle, same truth, but they're seeing it from their perspective. Daniel, much of his book is a message not to the Jew, but to the Gentile. And we especially see that beginning in chapter 2. Now let me read the first few verses here. In chapter 2 it says, "In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar." Now it's the second year, and of course we know Nebuchadnezzar co-reigned with his father for some time. So he's been in Babylon for a while, but now for 2 years he's been reigning alone. His father's no longer on the throne. Nebuchadnezzar really now just getting his feet under him. And the kingdom under his father was beginning to make some progress militarily, but Nebuchadnezzar is bringing it to new heights. And whether he thinks he's doing it himself, I don't know, but very clearly in the first chapter we know that God gave him this dominion. Now, who was supposed to be in charge of the earth? Well, the Jew. And the Jew now has gone into captivity into a Gentile nation, and so now it is really not, the earth is not controlled by the Jew in the sense that that's not the focus. There is no throne in Jerusalem. So now there is a Gentile that dominates the world, Nebuchadnezzar. Now he doesn't necessarily influence all this power. He didn't go all the way down into Africa. He didn't go all the way into Europe. He didn't go all the way into China, nor all the way up north. But the prophetic area that he covers, that is, which is modern day Iraq, he had the ability, had he decided to go to all of these places, and his military could have taken them. He had that kind of dominion, and his kingdom was a kingdom that was strict monarchy. I mean, his word was law. Now, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. The king said unto them, I've dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled, and I was troubled to know the dream. Now notice verse 4, it says, Then spake the Chaldeans to him in Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. Now I want you to take note of the fact that he says that at this point, the Chaldeans, his wise men as astrologers, spake to him in Syriac. Now that doesn't mean that they weren't already speaking in that language, but something is taking place here that God is making note of. Now, it's cued here in our Bible, you can see this, but remember the Bible originally was written in Hebrew. The New Testament, of course, written in Greek. The majority of the Old Testament was written in Hebrew originally, because obviously God gave the oracles of God to the Jew. But there's a small section here in the book of Daniel that was actually written in Aramaic. Now that section begins right here in verse 4, and God makes note of that when he says that the Chaldeans spake to him in Syriac, and then the language changes. So the first chapter, chapter 1, the first few verses of chapter 2 are Hebrew, and then now all of a sudden it becomes Aramaic. And that's why that little Q is there. Now just to show you, go over to chapter 7, because chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7 are all written in this Aramaic language. And then you come down to the very last part of chapter 7. Notice the Q is still in here, even in the English. It says in verse 28, "Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart." Now, hitherto is the end of the matter. But that didn't end the book of Daniel, because in chapter 8, verse 1, it goes right back into Hebrew. Now, that wasn't because that day the guy who wrote the first part was busy, and the guy they used to fill in didn't know Hebrew. I mean, God had a message here, something very specific, and it's still very clear what he's saying here in our King James Bible. But when you go back and realize, why would God write Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, all the way through the prophets? He writes it in Hebrew. He goes back to chapter 8 in the book of Daniel and continues in Hosea and Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, etc. And he writes it in Hebrew. But this one little section, he changes it and he writes it in Aramaic. Well, when it says he spoke in Syriac, that was the language of Babylon. That was the Aramaic. You know why he changed that language? The Jew now has been removed from Jerusalem. There's no throne in Jerusalem. The throne is in Babylon. But now God is not done dealing with his people. But now God has a message not just to the Jew, but to the Gentile, the Jew, the whole world. Now that doesn't mean that the Gentiles couldn't have found out what the Hebrew Bible said. They had people that day that understood Hebrew. They're responsible for what other parts of the Bible as well. But God steps out specifically and says, you Gentiles better pay attention, because this is very much concerns God's plan for the ages, his whole plan. Now there's a centerpiece to that plan that you're going to see in this chapter. But now he's going to reveal this. Now we a lot of times spend a lot of time looking at the dream that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed, because there is a prophetic element to it, and it's interesting. But most of the chapter is not taken up with that. Most of the chapter is taken up with Nebuchadnezzar not knowing the dream and Daniel interpreting it for him for a purpose. And the purpose wasn't just simply to tantalize our imagination. God has a definite message in this chapter. Now it starts, first of all, with this perplexity. Nebuchadnezzar dreams a dream, and he calls his Chaldeans and his astrologers and his smart people and so forth. Well, you remember that's why Daniel was brought to Babylon to begin with. They recognized that he was smart, recognized he had ability, and so they brought him in, and he is in this group of people that are counselors to the king. Now, obviously, he stands head and shoulders above the others, but the king doesn't know that. So the wise men, the astrologers, the main counselors come in, and of course, you see things haven't changed much. Back then, a monarch had all kinds of counselors to try to tell him, and usually they gave bad advice. Now we just democratically, at least make an effort at democratically electing leaders, and they have counselors that give them bad advice. Sometimes the counselors are worse, and sometimes they're better than the actual person they're advising. But here, Nebuchadnezzar seeks for his counselors. He said, I had a dream, and it's troubled me greatly, and bring those guys in here because I've got to find out what this is all about. It troubled him. Well, now God was speaking to Nebuchadnezzar. Now, even though he's a monarch, and even though God has a message for everybody, God still speaks to lost people. He might use a circumstance, He might use a Christian that lives next to them. He might use just in the quiet of the night when they're sitting in their bed, nobody's around, and they think, man, is all the life that I just go to work, wait the party on the weekend, the party's over, I'm empty. What is life even all about? That emptiness causes people to be troubled. Now here's the mistake Nebuchadnezzar made. He called for the wrong person to get his advice. You know, people often do that. I don't have any direction in my life. I'm not sure exactly what I'm supposed to, do. I don't know why I'm even here. I'm empty. I'm looking for something. So what do? They, in a worst case scenario, they call a psychic and see if they could tell them something. Some people maybe are not that superstitious, so they say, well, I'm going to go talk to a counselor or a psychiatrist or a psychologist, or maybe even they ask their best friend, what is the meaning of life? They're looking for somebody to tell them, when here's old Daniel, who was available all the time. The king just didn't know how smart Daniel really was. And by the way, it wasn't just smarts, but he didn't know this man was connected with God. And there are people all around us that don't even know that there's a group of people here that are stewards of the answer. We don't have it personally, but we're stewards of the answer, this Bible. I mean, this is the answer to why man's here, where he's going, where he came from, what his purpose is in life, and he'll never understand it nor know it nor be fulfilled by it till he knows the person of this book, the Lord Jesus Christ. So he calls for these people. They don't help him. They spake and said, tell us the dream, in verse 4, and we will show thee the interpretation. Now the king answered to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. Now there's a couple of thoughts here. He could mean by this, it's valid to see it this way, he could mean the edict or the command or the demand to tell him the dream is gone from him. That is, proceeded from him. I told you, I want you to tell me the dream and the interpretation. And they said, well, tell us the dream. And he says, well, you see the thing is gone. But probably more likely is the idea that I know I dreamed something, and I know it means something, but I can't articulate it to you. I'm not really sure exactly what the dream was like. It's fuzzy, it's hazy, and you've had dreams like that yourself. You wake up and you think, man, that was the craziest dream, and you try to explain it to somebody, and they look at you and they go, huh? Oh, never mind. I can't explain it to you, but it was just a crazy dream. Well, that's kind of where he's at. He knows it's significant, and he couldn't tell them what it was. That's probably right, but he could have perhaps just been trying to test them. If you can't show me what it is, how do I know for sure that what you're saying is accurate? Either way, that was a pretty good test, wasn't it? Whether he could remember it or not, that's a pretty good test. If you can tell me the dream, and I'll know it when I hear it, you tell me, I'll recognize it. Yep, that's the dream. Then I'll know. Anybody can tell me that dream and they weren't there, then I'll feel pretty good about your interpretation. Well, you know they didn't have the ability to do that. I mean, he asked them to do it. They said, there's no way. Said, if you don't do it, you're going to have big trouble. Well, the king answered and said, know of a certainty that you would gain the time. This is verse 8. Because you see the thing is gone from me. But if you will not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you. For you've prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me, till the time be changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me the interpretation. You know, if the king didn't have any more confidence in these guys than that, why did he call for them? I know you've prepared lying and corrupt words. You know, I really believe what the king did here, and again, he probably forgot the dream, but even if he didn't, this makes sense. There have been plenty of times that the king had maybe a dream. He woke up and he says, you know, I had a dream last night, and I, saw this particular person that came into my court, and they did this particular activity, and I responded in this way. What do you think that meant? Well, O king, what that means is that the armies of Babylon are going to march over the kingdom of Egypt, and your kingdom will spread to the ends of the earth, and great riches and honor are going to, and that last little part, I think, meant you were going to give a raise to the wise men. I mean, they just tell him something to make him feel better, boost his ego. Oh yeah, that sounds like that. That's pretty good. Put this guy in a higher position. I like his interpretation. But every time they told him that, he's not an idiot. They walked out and he thinks, they don't really know what that dream meant. But anyway, it sounded good, made me feel good, no problem. But this one was too serious. You know, it's kind of humorous sometimes. There'll be some kind of tragedy, a school shooting, or a big storm hits a place and a bunch of people die. And the news media will bring some religious figure on television and ask them to, pontificate about how you can comfort people and so forth. And of course, he can't mention Jesus, and he certainly couldn't use the authority of the Bible. I mean, he'd just be some lunatic if he did that. He can't really be specific about what people really need and what really brings comfort, so he might mention the name God, because everybody's a little sentimental right now. He could bring up God. And he might even talk, prayer is very popular. No problem to pray. That's never really offensive, because I don't know who they're praying to. I mean, you can pray, that's fine. If they're super secular, they'll just say, my thoughts are with you. I mean, I don't know how your thoughts help me. You have mental telepathy? I'm not sure what good that does. But again, here's the point. They don't have anything. Do you really think in a time of need, in a deep trouble, that the world really thinks that helps them? They know this person that's gotten lying and corrupt words. It's his job to get up and say everything's great. There's something inside of you. You've got inner strength. All you need to do is just look inside, keep your focus on yourself and what's the good. Don't look at the bad. What kind of fluff is that? I mean, there is bad in the world. There is evil in the world. And they just can't give them an answer. That's where Nebuchadnezzar, he's done with it. I've heard enough of the lying and corrupt words. You either tell it to me, or there's not going to be any more wise men in Babylon. Well, the threat didn't help, because they didn't have the ability to tell him that dream. There is no ability. You know, the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God. God has got a message here. They had no idea what that message was. Now, without reading a lot of verses, Daniel's not part of this little group. Evidently, even though he's in the wise men and astrologer camp, he's not one of the high-up counselors, so they don't even call for him. So Nebuchadnezzar says, I'm done with it. I don't even want to hear any more of them. Just go ahead and kill them all. When Nebuchadnezzar said kill them all, there was going to be a mass funeral. I mean, his word was edict. So Daniel, of course, now the guy shows up to Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego and says, okay, you guys are toast. You're heading out. Well, we don't even know about this. What happened? And he gives them the story. So Daniel goes to the king and looks in verse 14. Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was going forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree so hasty? Arioch made the thing known to Daniel. Daniel went in, desired of the king that he would give him the time, and he would show the king the interpretation. Now, Daniel doesn't know what happened. He hadn't heard about this, nor does Daniel know the dream, and most certainly doesn't know the interpretation. But he is going to know it. Why did God not just tell Daniel, Arioch's going to be coming over, let him know when he gets there, this is going to happen, and you go see the king, and you can just go ahead and tell him when you walk in there that you know the dream, tell it to him, tell him the interpretation. God didn't do it that way. You say, why? Well, when I get to heaven, I'll ask him. He doesn't always do things the way we do it. Daniel had to go pray. He had to go ask God what exactly is going on. Do you think that Daniel now would have bothered if he didn't think that God was going to show him what this dream was? I mean, he just knows it's a matter of, hey, I just got to meet with these guys. We'll have prayer. And if God wants you to know, he can show you. And so he goes to prayer. He prays, and he gets his companions to pray. And here's what they prayed in verse 18, that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven. You know, when you see a lot of different ways that God is addressed in the Bible, You go back to the book of Genesis, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So you read God did this and God did that. All of a sudden now, God made man in his own image, and the Lord God, here's another term, Lord, L-O-R-D, Jehovah. The Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground. And then the L-O-R-D begins to talk to Noah. I'm going to make a covenant with you. He talks to Abraham. I'm going to make a covenant with you. But then when he talks to Gentiles, many times it is God. Or when he's talking about his power in creation, his name is different. Well, in Ezra, Nehemiah, and Daniel is the only place you find the God of heaven. I mean, he is the God of heaven. But there is an emphasis. Israel now has been pulled out of the land. Ezra, Nehemiah, and Daniel record that. Ezekiel also lived during the time Daniel did, but if you read Ezekiel, the whole perspective of Ezekiel is what happened while we were in the land. The Lord did this, you dishonored him, you turned from him. It's almost as if he's still there. So he addresses him at the Lord. But the God of heaven is a message to the Gentile world. He is the God of heaven. Now, you could even say as Israel was in Jerusalem and God was overseeing the whole world from that perspective, in a sense, he was the Lord of the earth. God owns the earth, but when he speaks to these Gentiles, he wants you to know he's bigger than just a Jewish God. He's over all. He is the God of heaven. There's not another one, by the way. I mean, there are plenty of gods, don't get me wrong, but there's only one God of heaven. You know, sometimes a person says, well, I just think there are many ways to heaven, many different religions, as long as you're sincere. I mean, here's a person who lives over in a land and they just really believe that Buddhism is the way to do it, and their ancestors, and just living a good life, and I'm not sure what Zen or Yin or all that stuff means, and good karma. I thought to start with it was something you put on your ice cream, but I'm not sure exactly what it is, but they're just sincere about it, and they really believe it with all their heart, and you mean to tell me they're not going to make it to heaven? Well, it's like this. If you want to make your own religion, then make yourself your own heaven too. If you want to go to God's heaven, then you got to go God's way. The God that lives in heaven has a way to be received, and it's through his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ. That's reasonable, isn't it? This is my heaven. I'm the only God here, and if you want to get to me, I've made a way for you to do it. And like we talked about Sunday, if you get there another way, well, I sure sent my own son to die for you. That sure makes that meaningless, doesn't it? If you can get there some other way. And by the way, no other way could you do anyway. If it was works, how much works would be enough? But it's through his Son. So he says he's the God of heaven. Well, there's a long narrative here, and I can't go through all of this, but the secret was revealed in verse 19 unto Daniel in a night vision. Daniel blessed the God of heaven. And Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. He changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise, and knowledge to them that know understanding. He revealeth the deep and the secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. I thank thee and praise thee, O thou God of my fathers, who hath given me wisdom and might, and has made known unto me now what he desired of thee, for thou hast made known to us the king's matter. Now, a couple of things. Daniel, first of all, was glad that God showed him the dream, and then told him what to tell Nebuchadnezzar. But evidently, Daniel not only says, I'm going to tell you the dream and tell you what it means, Daniel grasped what the message to Nebuchadnezzar was. You know, this is very similar to Pharaoh. When, God didn't tell Joseph what he was going to do. He told Pharaoh, and then Joseph interpreted it. So he tells Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel interprets it, but from his prayer of praise, his worship, God changes times and seasons. He sets up kings, he removes kings. He knew what this dream was about. He said, boy, you're going to show Nebuchadnezzar something today. I mean, you're getting ready to show him something that's never been shown to anybody, and you're showing it to a Gentile. But of course, Daniel knew about it before Nebuchadnezzar did. and he's going to give them a prophetic picture of his plan. Now, Daniel, of course, meets back with Nebuchadnezzar, and he says to him in verse 28, in other words, in verse 27, he says, your men can't do it. They came short. But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and maketh known to King Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. And then he goes on to tell him, you saw an image. And you can read the passage and study it, but you've probably read this before. The image had a head of gold, and then it went down to a silver part. And then, of course, it goes down to brass, and then the legs are of iron, and the feet are of mingled iron and clay. So that's the picture that he's seeing, and he points that out. So his this large image of what appears to be a man with a head of gold, and then he's got the breast and arms of silver, and then basically all of this is brass, and his legs. He says, that's what you saw. And Nebuchadnezzar said, man, that's it. I knew, I almost could see it. It was on the tip of, man, that's it. And so Daniel begins to tell him, he says, all those metals and the place where they're located are significant. Now, that was just the first part of the dream. The second part, I want to read to you. He says down in verse 35, then was the iron and the clay and the brass and the silver and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them, and the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Now that's why it was in his mind, he couldn't get this together, but here's the image made out of these metals, and then it's kind of funny, iron and clay at the bottom, and a rock came and hit it, bam, and it broke the iron and the clay. But it didn't stop there. It pulverized the entire image, and then when it finished, it began to grow, and it filled the whole earth. He says, that's what you saw. And Nebuchadnezzar said, wow, that's exactly what I saw. Now, in short, just what he basically gets to is telling them is these different four elements are four world empires. He said, Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. The most pure, the most dominant. His was first. He said, after you, there's going to be another kingdom. He didn't tell him the exact name of it. He says there'll be another kingdom following you, and it's represented by the silver, not quite as good as gold, not as quite as pure. It's going to be a little bit less of a monarchy. There's going to be some counselors and stuff involved. The Medes and the Persians, we'll see that in the book of Daniel, how the presidents were able to overcome even what the king wanted, and through Daniel in the lion's den. So not quite as big of a monarchy. And then you're going to have the brass that's going to come in. He doesn't name it, but we know from history. Didn't exist yet, by the way. The Medo-Persian Empire didn't exist, and certainly the Grecian Empire wasn't even thought about. These people were just little tribes and stuff that lived out in these areas. And then he said a final one, and this is the focus, the final one is going to be the most interesting was these legs of brass and the mingled clay and the iron. This is what, in verse 40, the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, it shall break in pieces and bruise. Whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay, part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay. And the toes of the feet were part of iron, part of clay. So the kingdom shall be partly strong, partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as the iron is not mixed with clay. Now this is going to come up later, so I'm not going to go in great detail. I want to keep it again on this level because there's a practical point here. But when you get to the iron, that is a picture of the Roman Empire. And later on he explains even more details about it. The Roman Empire was the most ominous, significant the way it controlled the largest amount of territory. Now, it was a mixture of a republic and an imperial government. So it was weak. It was mingled. The iron started off strong, but then at the bottom. But here's the interesting thing to me. The legs are all of iron. Then there's a break. Then you move to feet that are mixed. There's a distinction between those legs and those feet. And those feet, of course, with 10 toes. And the 10 toes are 10 kings. We see that in chapter 7. What makes that shift between the iron and the mixture? Well, we know the Roman Empire started some 50 years before Christ or something, and then about 500 A.D., it was over as far as we think about the Roman Empire per se. But what's going to happen, some of the things he's talking about haven't happened yet, because that Roman Empire is going to be brought back together. And it's going to be on this earth again. The basic premise of that Roman Empire is going to be after Jesus comes. So when that comes back, which is yet future, what is that little difference between those iron legs and that mingled iron and clay? There's a spot in between. I mean, there's something breaks that. It goes from iron to the mingled, and that is the church. The church sits right between those two. God didn't reveal it here, but there's a shift. The Roman Empire supposedly ends. Somebody says, well, it's over. None of that stuff happened that Daniel talked about. Oh, it's going to. It's going to take place just as surely as he predicted it would start. He predicted how it would end. Well, that end hadn't happened yet because the stone has not been cut out without hands. Now, the stone is the Lord Jesus Christ. He is the stumbling stone that the Jews stumbled over. He is the stone, the builder, the cornerstone of the church. He already came and was on a cross. And today he is, of course, calling out a people for his name. But when we are taken out of here, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but that's a great argument for the rapture of the church, because again, he points it out right here. It's a parenthetical period. God is not dealing with the church when he goes to the mingled clay and iron. The church is gone. Now he goes back to his prophetic plan, and that stone without hands, that's the Lord Jesus coming, and he's going to wipe out all of men's kingdoms. There's only going to be one, and it's going to be the stone that fills the whole earth and becomes a great mountain. And a mountain's always a picture of a kingdom in the Bible. That's going to be God's kingdom, and it's really the millennial kingdom. Well, the last thing you take note of when he heard this, in verse 46, Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshiped Daniel, and commanded they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. And the king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth, that your God is a God of gods, and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets. Well, it's not enough to believe he's a God. And so Nebuchadnezzar at this point, still full of pride, says, I'll tell you what, I believe your God's just about as great as I am. But you notice what most people believe today? They think when they give him a little credence, a little tip in a tight spot, they're basically saying, well, I think he's worthy of a little honor. No, he's worthy of you bowing the knee before him, humbling yourself, and admitting who he is. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't do that at this point, but later on, of course, God's still got some things to show him. We're going to stop there tonight and just pray God will help us to study that deeper as we look at it ourselves. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to study your word tonight. Certainly you have a plan, and you are going to implement that plan. It's remarkable, Lord, that you painted that picture before it even took place, showed it to the world, and you're going to keep it in detail. We know we have yet to see the final part of that plan because it's going to happen when Jesus comes. And we know he's coming. I pray that we'll be prepared for that day, and if those that don't know him would see their need, that even tonight they'd come to receive him. We as believers would be looking and saying, even so come, Lord Jesus. We thank you for your word tonight in Jesus' name. Amen.